Hi, I'm Marlene Winfield. I've probably over the years met most of you at these events, but it's really good to be here today. And I was just looking at, I'm coming in a minute to, I'm going to tell you a bit about the role of trustees, and then I'm coming to the hot topics. And one of the hot topics was how best to work with the NAC to gather information from all of you to inform decisions without overloading you with constant questions. So obviously a very timely hot topic for the trustees. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the role of trustees, what it is we do. And what it is we do basically is do the strategy and the overseeing of the organization. We don't do the doing. That's done by the staff. And it's a delicate balance for trustees to strike, because if we get too bogged down in the detail, then we get a lot of friction with the staff and we prevent them from doing their work. So we can't get too bogged down in the detail. But if we don't oversee well enough, if we don't know enough of the detail, then we could get a situation like the one that's happening to Kids Club at the moment, where things were going pear-shaped and the board of trustees didn't realize what was happening. So it's a very careful balance that trustees have to strike to make sure that the organization runs smoothly, but to let it run smoothly. So one of the things we do is to help keep the trust within the law. We have to comply with charity law, other general laws. We also have to comply with the terms of the funding that we receive. The Department of Health has imposed terms on us. We have a covenant with Diageo that we have to keep to. So one of the things we do is to make sure that we're not doing anything that goes outside of what we've already agreed with our funders. So we have to keep the trust honest. We oversee the organization's performance, including ensuring that the organization is keeping to the budget, which I'm sure you would all want us to do. One of the most important things to all of us, and particularly to you, is that we have to maintain good investment performance. We've got a lot of money that's invested on your behalf that you're dependent on, and we have to make sure that it's invested in a way that maximizes its value and its worth to you. And Kevin Westbroom, who some of you have seen here in previous years, is in charge. He chairs the Finance Committee, and he's in charge of making sure that we maximize the performance of the investments. We receive the money from the Department of Health and from Diageo, and we oversee how it's distributed to you, either in the form of your annual allowance and major grants. And the most important thing we do in that respect is to make sure that it's done fairly and that you're all treated equally. And that is very important to us. It's one of our highest priorities, to make sure that you're all treated equally. And we also, you saw a lot today about some of the other things that are going on, as well as providing you with money. And we oversee all of that other provision that we make to you and the kinds of support that we make to you, which we change as your needs change. We try to keep changing those things to make sure that we're always providing the non-financial support that you need, as well as the financial support. And that is down to me to a certain extent, because I chair the Health and Wellbeing Committee, working very closely with Simone and Roland, who chair and are chair and vice chair of the NAC version of that committee. We maintain a relationship with the Department of Health and with Diageo, and we also support the efforts of the NAC to increase our funding from both those sources, and indeed from other potential sources, which some of you heard about today in the campaign session. We commission and oversee research like the Firefly research, and our priority in that respect is that ensuring that anything that we commission, any kind of research that we do, is something that's going to benefit you. And that is, the buck for that stops with Caroline, who chairs the research committee. We deal also with new claims to join the trust, And the Claims Committee is chaired by Sir Robert Nelson, who also chairs the trust. We deal with other policy issues as they arise, and we deal with complaints. So that's just a sort of list, a general list of the things that we do as trustees. But as Craig said this morning, and I just want to stress, we do very little without working in partnership with the NAC. And the only limits to that are where there would be a conflict of interest, or where we're making a decision about an individual beneficiary based on very personal information that you've shared with us, so that there would be a confidentiality issue, because it's very important to us that we protect your confidentiality. So that's what we do as trustees. What are our hot topics at the moment? Well, as Deborah said this morning, one of our hot topics is how best we assess and meet the needs of individuals and you as a beneficiary community, ensuring that we're supporting everyone, not just those who have the ability to focus attention on them, that we're actually reaching all of you. And so that's why we've asked for a review of the individual beneficiary review processes, as you heard this morning, to make sure that when we assess your needs, we do it in a way that's inclusive, that's appropriate to circumstances. As we've heard and as you well know, you're all experiencing increasing health problems as you age, so your functioning is all deteriorating to some extent. And so we need an assessment system that takes that into account for all of you and not just some of you. And also, we need a system that helps us gather evidence that we can use in the important negotiations we're going to be having with funders. Apart from the one about not overloading you with questions, another hot topic for us is how to deal with the increasing demand that some of you are making on us, quite justifiably, for large grants, and how to do that in a way that's in your best interests, so that we're sure that you're not putting yourselves in a position where your grant is unaffordable, because that has implications not only for you as an individual, but for the whole of the beneficiary community. And that is always a balance that we have to maintain, balance between what we do for an individual and what we do for the beneficiary community. We have to ensure that our investment strategy as a trust is fit for the next phase of your lives, with your increasing health needs, your changing work patterns, and also your planning for your later years of life. And I hope you have many more of those later years. And also important for this year of negotiations to build up evidence in any way we can to inform the future negotiations with the Department of Health and with Diageo. And finally, reviewing how we deal with new people who want to join the trust, people making claims to join the trust, to ensure that we're always making decisions based on the most up-to-date criteria. And with that, we're working very closely with the World Health Organization and St. George's Hospital to help us ensure that we are using the best criteria. So that's what we do. That's what's occupying us at the moment. And with that, I will pass on to Deborah. Right, so we won't pass on to Deborah now. Well, we lost two very long-serving trustees this year who had served for, I think, 12 and 13 years. Oleg Ehrman and Mike Napier. Oleg was our representative from the hospital side of health, and Mike was our expert on personal injury law and product liability law. And we also, for family reasons, lost Joe Curtis, who was our investment expert. But we've been very fortunate in replacing them with some equally excellent people, one of whom you'll hear from in a moment, and two others. Professor Tim Briggs from the Royal National Orthopedic Hospital, who is a consultant orthopedic and traumatic surgery, consultant orthopedic and traumatic surgery, and is a past president of the British Orthopedic Association, and has very recently been appointed to a very important job in the Department of Health as one of the health czars to do with safety. So he will be in charge of the safety policy at the Department of Health. So we're very, very lucky to have him. I will introduce Katie Sago, who you met briefly this morning, in a minute, but first I want to introduce you to our other new trustee and let him say a few words to you. David Bodie, who is a very distinguished personal injury lawyer who has recently retired from full-time work but specialized in product liability, which is very, very pertinent to us. He's an experienced trustee, including he's a trustee of the Patients Association, and he writes and edits journals on topics such as risk and safety in medicine. So we're very pleased to welcome him. He's going to do a great job on your behalf, and I'd like to invite him to say a few words.
Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, it's great to be here. I very much wanted to spend the day and hear what was said. Can you not? I always mumble, I apologize. It's great to spend the day with you and to hear what's going on and to hear the presentations that have been made, which I think reveal a huge amount about the concerns and achievements that a relatively small group of people have made and are continuing to make. I've been invited to say a few things about myself, which is always rather disconcerting. When you're described as a distinguished lawyer, you have to bear in mind advice I was given about 20 years ago, that distinguished when it's applied to lawyers generally means that they're over 50 years old and not currently under indictment. I am certainly over 50 years old, and I'd like to reserve my position on the other side of that definition. Because you never know. I should say I live in Sheffield, although I am originally a Welshman, which means that when Phil Williams, who was on the interview committee when I was interviewed to be a trustee, immediately wanted to know my views about the Welsh rugby team to see if they were appropriate and fully formed. And I've since been joined onto an email list of his, which it's been pretty intense recently, as you might imagine. I'm a sort of trainee Yorkshireman because I've only lived in Sheffield for 23 years, but I have 2 children born in the city who are eligible, as they point out to me, my daughters at least point out to me, that they're eligible to play cricket for Yorkshire. We'll see, time will tell. To say a word or two about what I've done, because that's really good, because I haven't got the most embarrassing ringtone in the room. It could be so much worse, let me tell you. I was at a meeting last year when my ringtone went off, and it was with a really rather distinguished judge chairing it. And I got a glare from the judge, who immediately said when he'd heard my ringtone, that was by Creedence Clearwater Revival, 1972. Pass straight on. And I went up to apologise, because you always need to go and apologise to judges when you've been stupid. And I said, what's your ringtone then, if you're being so? He said, well, actually, it's the boys are back in town, but I always switch my phone off. Good trick if you can do it. As I say, just to say a word or two about my background as a lawyer. I've acted for claimants for 34 years. I've worked in clinical negligence for individuals predominantly, and I've had experience during that time of doing high-value damages work for individual claimants with birth injuries chiefly, and I've done a huge number of those. As far as group actions are concerned, I've done a lot of product liability work. Most recently, I've been involved in doing things about hips and knees that have gone wrong, but through the 1990s, I did a series of pieces of litigation about Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. The first set of claims arose from treatment of young children who had growth hormone deficiency and who were given a contaminated version of that. And that then led to me being involved in leading the lobbying for, and then subsequently representing about 150 families at what became the BSE inquiry. And after that, I was involved in negotiating and implementing a compensation scheme for them. In the last 12 years, I've been involved in bringing claims on behalf of children who have been affected because their mothers took a drug called Epilin whilst they were pregnant. And Epilin, sodium valproate, is an unresolved problem even as we speak. I've never had an involvement from a legal viewpoint with thalidomide, but I think it's fair to say that my career at various points has had resonances of thalidomide with it. In the first instance, for example, when I was at university and I was learning about the law, I was taught by someone who was one of the junior counsel on the team for distillers. As you might imagine, we had a few arguments when I had found out enough to understand what he was doing. I didn't get it very right then, but then neither did he. If you look at the situation that prevailed in the 1980s, when I was a young lawyer in practice, and the way things have changed, a great number of the things that have happened in the field of personal injury law have happened because people have said, we must never have another thalidomide. And in fact, there's a piece of legislation which arose because of the experience you had. It's called the Product Liability Directive. Its domestic expression is the Consumer Protection Act 1987. It arises directly from what happened and the ability or the inability of the law properly to respond to thalidomide as a problem. And it's that legislation that we've been using in the last 20 years and latterly over sodium valproate. So I feel as though I don't know very much yet about thalidomide, and I am learning. I'm learning a lot. And I'm hoping that what I'm going to be able to do is to help with the enormous amount of work that's going on. One thing particularly that I've had some limited involvement in recently, and I hope to do more with, is the... Second? I will do my best. Yeah, I always do. I spent a whole career whispering in corridors. That's mostly why. As I said, there's a piece of work which Caroline Glendenning and Liz Buckle are running relating to earnings loss, earnings diminution, and pension losses. And I'm hoping sincerely that's something I can help with, because I think that's going to be a major concern in the coming year in the discussions with Diageo. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I should say about myself. I'm very fond of the West Wing. I think that's probably about the only other thing I can comment. I'm on my 4th or 5th viewing, which is a bit over emphatic. Anyway, that's what I do.
Thanks very much, David. I don't know what it is about you guys. Apart from me, you've managed to attract some really terrific trustees. I don't know what it is you've got, but whatever it is, I'd like to have some of it too. Now I'd like to introduce Katie Sago, who is our new Director for Health and Wellbeing. She spent 15 years as a senior manager in social care and social housing, and particularly on support services and health and well-being services for people with a variety of different types of needs. And she also chairs an organization for people with disabilities, and she describes herself as a campaigner with a face for the radio, but when you see her, you'll know that's not true.
I've made some notes, because when you're in this situation, your mind goes blank, even when you're talking about yourself, I think, doesn't it? But so I have been involved for the last 15 years in working in social care regulation, and for the last 11 of those 15 years in housing, in social housing, supported housing, care and support needs, advice and advocacy services, housing adaptation services, setting up new approaches to user-led community wellbeing services to respond to the new integrated health agenda. So all of these sort of buzzwords, but the core through it is trying to facilitate people who know what their needs are in working out solutions with people who have the money and often the power. And I haven't only been working for 15 years. The 10 years before that, I was living and working in West Africa on local community-led projects to get people who are on the margins of society or the margins of involvement heard and influenced. So that's my interest and my passion, really. I have quite a bit of experience of working with volunteers and working in the third sector. I am the chair of a community transport and befriending service in Northamptonshire, which is where I used to work. I live on the edge of Northamptonshire and Cambridgeshire. And that's a really worthwhile organisation, and it gives you some insight into the challenges facing volunteers and giving them the support and structure that they need. So I'm really pleased to be here. Can't really see you over this. Really pleased to be joining the Thalidomide Trust. This is the end of my second week. So I was only the new girl for a week because Emily arrived. So now I'm no longer the new girl. So I'm pleased about that. I've jotted down I've started to build my to-do list, as you do. It's up to 4 pages, and I've reviewed it with a lot of what I've heard today, but sort of some highlights of areas I'll be focusing on. First of all, one of my key roles is to support, develop and encourage the HealthLink team, and that part of my role is a real blessing. You met them all a bit earlier, and they're a fantastic team, so I'm envisaging that part of my job will be my nurturing and light relief part of it, really, because they're great people to work with. Other than that, what I see as the role of the health and wellbeing part of the trust is to, and some of this you've heard a few times today, it's quite a strong message, but to respond to what you're telling us about your health needs and the changing needs, and to respond to that by providing information, by looking at what services we can provide, but also by looking at what's going on outside, how we can connect in to get our voice heard a bit stronger, or your voice is heard a bit stronger, and to add value to what the trust can do. And also, as the message that's come through several times, and is a really important one, is to get the evidence, get your stories, and use that as leverage to secure your futures going forward and secure funding and ensure that the Department of Health, Diageo, really understand the picture in terms of health needs. The other bit that that Deborah's mentioned earlier and that I really strongly endorse and want to make sure happens is about bringing the trust out to you. So this involves the IBR review, that you don't need to come and ask us for help. We try to come out and meet you, understand people's individual needs, be a more local and accessible presence where we can, have information more readily available that is easy to find on the website, the sorts of stuff the HealthLink were talking about, having stuff ready, prepared, gathering as much information and acting as a single repository and a single point of contact for that you can give us. You give us that information and we can make it accessible to everybody. And to look at how we can harness your own skills and experiences and help you develop peer support networks where you can talk to each other, volunteer and support each other, bring your enormous skills and experience to the trust for the benefit of everybody. So that's an area I'll be focusing on. And then one other area is Dee isn't here, and she's been talked about a lot, but in my role as Director of Health and Wellbeing, I will obviously be working really closely with Dee to make sure that the health work that she does is supported, and while she does individual confidential work, the learning from that is brought back and used for the benefit of everybody. So there's quite a few, I mean, that's a real broad overview. There's quite a few meaty chunks of work to be done in there, and I hope that you'll see the health and wellbeing role of the Trust improve even more. It's a fantastic, there's some fantastic work being done, but we'd like to take it forward. For the first time for a while, there's a full team on board in that area of work, and I think over the next few months and hopefully years, you'll see the continued benefit to yourself arising from that area of work. So that's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. And then just going back to the trustees for a minute, I should say that we have a third new trustee called Mark Benstead, who's a senior investment manager at Legal & General. And I hope you'll have a chance to meet him possibly next year.
I just wanted to warn you, but also issue a big invitation. As people have said earlier, I was introduced as chair of the Trust Research Committee, so we oversee all the research that the Trust commissions, apart from the beneficiary survey, which you are doing yourselves. And I just wanted to say two things. One is a bit of a warning, and the other is, well, not a warning, but it's things that are coming up, and the other is an issue an invitation. So, some beneficiaries have approached staff and trustees and said, look, we're really concerned about the fact that thalidomide survivors are increasingly, because of their health problems, are giving up work early. So whereas you perhaps normally expect to be working until you're 60, 65, people are increasingly stopping work in their 50s, or they're cutting down their hours, going to part-time jobs, or perhaps looking for jobs that are less physically demanding, and therefore also less well paid. And this has an impact on your quality of life at the moment as your needs are increasing and as you need more expensive equipment, for example. But it also has a knock-on effect on pensions as well. So if you're contributing to an occupational pension scheme, you give up work, your pension in old age is going to be reduced. So one of the pieces of work that the Research Committee is planning at the moment, very much with the help of Liz Buckle and Stuart Kenworthy, is to look at the extent to which thalidomide is causing you to lose earnings over and above, beyond what you would normally have expected to earn. We're going to be following up the survey that Liz has outlined and asking Liz to do some very, very detailed analysis of the questions that you've given to her, to the Firefly survey, the answers that you've given about your work and your earnings. And we will probably be coming back to ask some of you some more detailed questions. As Liz said, we're really, really grateful that many of you have said you're willing to take part in further research. And as I say, we may well be contacting some of you to ask you for much more detailed information on the jobs you've been doing, the earnings that you've had, and the extent to which your thalidomide problems and health problems have affected your earnings. And then we'll be taking that, and with the help of David, as a sort of with expertise in calculating the losses, we will be putting all of that together to try and build up a picture of the amount of earnings that's been lost by thalidomide as a whole. And this will be really, really important in terms of next year's discussions with Diageo. Because, Liz and Stuart Kenworthy have sort of said, well, when the original settlement with Diageo took place, was finalised, that people, you were young and people didn't think about your future earnings. And there's a general feeling that earnings loss wasn't factored in properly to the settlement with distillers. So that's a piece of work that we're coming on to do. And as I say, we'd be coming back to some of you, and if you're willing, we'd be asking you for detailed figures. Of course, we'll keep all of those figures confidential, so that I know it's about asking you about people like talking about money even less than they're prepared to talk about sex, but, we will be keeping whatever you tell us. Absolutely, confidential. People won't be able to be identified. The other thing I just wanted to say more generally, my sort of role as chair of the research committee, is the research committee got set up in a fairly kind of ad hoc way, and people occasionally pop up and they say, oh, it'd be nice to do a bit of research on that, or I found somebody who says they'd do a project on the other. If there are things that you think the trust should be doing research on, let us know. Talk to the NAC, talk to the staff. Because, we will listen, but we can only know what research to plan and to undertake if you tell us. So it's an invitation to you, if there are pieces of research that you think the trust ought to be carrying out on your behalf, then please say so. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. After that, does anybody have any questions for Caroline or anyone else? Okay, well.
Okay, thank you.
When I chair the Trustees Health and Wellbeing Committee, Simone always keeps a very careful check on my time. So I'm going to my timekeeping. So I'm going to point out that this session has finished 10 minutes early. Simone. Anyway, thank you all very much. It's been really good to see you all today.